I'm joined now by Wes Bowden. Wes, you're an attorney at 11 Papantonio, right?
Yes, that's right.
And you're working on a case that came out of the C8 case. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of the genesis of it was C8, as some of your viewers may know, was a contaminant that was found throughout the Mid-Ohio Valley, and it was a chemical that was used in making Teflon, and it was just excreted into the water through the smokestacks, and it really poisoned about 70,000 people. We started looking at that litigation. We realized that.
And we should say that this was DuPont, right?
Yeah, it was DuPont. That's right.
And the chemical C8 was made by 3M for a while, and then 3M realized, like, this is just so toxic, we don't want to be in this business.
Yeah.
Because you got to burn this stuff off, and it has no half-life. Well, I mean, but it's an extremely long half-life.
Yeah.
And so DuPont said, well, we'll just manufacture our own, and instead of burning it, they just dumped it into river because, easier, I guess. And who's going to notice until, I guess, about 25 years ago, a farmer, his cows were dying, and that started the whole thing rolling.
That's right.
So over the course of that litigation, which at least, I guess ended in a massive did they end up settling after the first couple of cases?
So we tried three of them. During the fourth case, they settled, and they ended up paying that community that they poisoned. So about 3,500 cases settled for a very large sum.
Right. Okay. And so out of that case, you came across this new chemical? What?
Right. So in the course of discovery and looking at the information in that case, we realized there is a kind of a sister chemical, if you will, called PFOS. Very structurally similar, still an 8-carbon chain. And what's unique about these chemicals is they have fluorine bonds instead of hydrogen. And that's important chemistry-wise because those bonds are really hard to break. And as you were saying, they just never break down naturally in the environment. So when we saw that, we realized that these chemicals were showing up everywhere in the country, and they're showing up at specific sites, predominantly around Department of Defense, Navy, Air Force bases, where they're using firefighting foams.
So now, how did you find? And we should say that all of us in this room probably have some C8 in our system at this point.
We do, yeah.
Right? I mean, which is nuts. It is, and that's because it travels. It just keeps traveling because it never breaks down.
Right.
It's never sort of absorbed in a way. It just lingers everywhere. So we all have it in our systems at this point. It's just a question of what levels it becomes toxic. So how do you find out when you see this other chemical that exists that has a similar structure? So you know that at the very least, it's one that lingers around, and that's not good for human beings. How do you know that it was located in these different areas?
So that's a great question. So it's fascinating, the story of this. Only a couple years ago did our government start looking into this. And so what happened was in 2016, the EPA came out with a guideline, not a standard, but just a guideline, saying that this chemical in amounts in excess of 70 parts per trillion, which is about a drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That small amount of chemical can cause health effects, adverse health effects. So the EPA said, we're going to come up with a guideline right now, and they're working on coming up with a standard which hopefully would be much lower. But if you exceed this guideline, it's time to start taking actions. So when the Department of Defense realized this, they said, oh my gosh, we've been using this chemical at every Air Force base, at every Navy base, at every firefighting training facility, and they started doing tests. And so what they did was they made a list, literally made a list saying, where do we think we're going to find this? Started going through the list, and they found it everywhere. Not at 70 parts per trillion, but at 9,000 parts per trillion, 10,000 parts per trillion. So they started testing people's water around these military sites. And what they've done, to their credit, although it's been delayed and it's been slow in getting there, they've started giving these communities their own bottled water. As we're talking today, there are communities throughout our country where the U.S. Navy is delivering on a weekly basis bottled water because they don't believe their water is safe to drink. And those are only the places that they've tested. So we've tested, I say we, as a country, we've only tested 3% of the water supply, just 3%. And out of that 3%, we estimate that more than 6 million people are exposed to this chemical. And so it's a big problem. It's just the tip of the iceberg.
So who made this chemical?
historically, 3M made it. So they developed it back in the 1950s, and they started promoting it in products in the 1960s and 1970s. In around 1999-2000, 3M started getting pressure, largely because of the tenant lawsuit. They realized that this was going to be, the veil was being pulled back, and they were going to be exposed.
Largely because of the C8 case.
Yes,
They
exactly.
started getting wind that like, oh boy.
Right, so they pulled out, and DuPont said, we don't care, full steam ahead for us. So then DuPont started making some of these chemicals, and there's a large group of chemicals that have these properties. But
What's wrong with the people at DuPont? Like they just see like, oh, this stuff is too dangerous for you to make?
I
Boom.
think
That's our business plan.
I think that hits the nail on the head right there. That's their business plan.
I was being
It's that
facetious.
It's someone in that company sat down and looked at what is it going to cost us to resolve our litigation versus what is it going to cost us to change our behavior. This has already come out in trial. I used it in one of my trials.
Right.
They realized in the mid-1980s that they could incinerate this chemical instead of just dumping it into the river, instead of just dumping it into the smokestack. You know what their number was? They did an accounting, 15 cents per pound, $1 million a year on a company that was grossing just in this one department alone $100 million in net profit. It was over $1 billion gross revenue. So for 15 cents, they're willing to poison people.
And they just assumed like either we'll get away with it,
Right.
or if we have to pay damages, it'll be less than 15 cents per pound, essentially.
Yeah.
Or I'm CEO right now, and I probably won't be here in 15 years.
That's a large part of it too. So when we look at these litigations that occur over and over again, we think to ourselves, how can these companies continue on this course of conduct? Ask yourself, how many of these executives are going to jail? You just never see those headlines.
Right.
Wall Street doesn't care. The stock might dip briefly, but it always rebounds. These executives, they say, oh, well, that was in the past. We've changed our conduct. It's because there's a delay. They're just very good at the cover-up. It took us 40 years to figure out what was wrong with this community. And now, they've paid a settlement. The settlement was $670 million. During that time period, they made billions in profit, billions for their shareholders. So, until there's a way that we can actually hold people in executive positions accountable and, actually change legislatively and hold them criminally accountable, even the company, I don't know that we're going to be able to really change the course of conduct of these companies.
Okay, I didn't mean to sidetrack the story, but yeah, I mean that's yeah. I mean this, I mean I feel like the work that the attorneys do here change specific conduct, and in some instances has a more lasting impact, but it's almost like a little bit of a whack-a-mole type of situation.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, so this chemical, DuPont sees that, 3M's too afraid of this. That's where we make our money, because our business model is that we do, the stuff that non-sociopaths won't do because there's a market in it, and so they start making the chemical, and then they must know at that point, right? Because 3M is obviously, it's profitable for 3M at least to some extent, right?
Right.
And so they must know that there's a problem, like almost inherently. Is that almost like prima facie evidence that they...
We had a document written in 1982 from their in-house counsel saying we have been liable for the past 32 years of operation. And this is their attorney saying what you're doing is wrong. Internally, their head medical director said this is a known animal carcinogen, and we believe that it is a probable human carcinogen. So this isn't science waiting to develop today. This is a company saying we know this, but we're not going to tell regulators, and we'll deal with it when someone files suit. There's literally a document that we used in one of our trials where their head epidemiologist, a person who's in charge of looking at health effects in large populations, said we have a cancer problem, a human cancer problem at our work site. Do we want to do the study? And the note at the bottom of the memo is, I quote this, wait to do the study until we are sued. That's the mentality this company takes when it comes to people.
So now, my understanding is DuPont is out of business, or
as a shell game.
Right.
So.
Okay. So yeah, tell me that shell game.
So what happened was in the 2010s, DuPont spun off its fluoropolymers department into Chemours. And they loaded up Chemours with debt. They made Chemours pay them a bunch of money as a dividend. And they were basically just trying to set this company up, in my opinion, to fail. And they had an agreement in place to make it to where Chemours was going to pay all of these claims, a way to further limit their liability.
So they create an arm's length entity that is basically just kicking money back to them, but owns all the liability for the product. And so it's like, well, it's not us, it's this Chemours guys over here, and so, they don't have many assets. So you're in trouble because they're just a PO box.
Right. So they loaded them up with probably $400 million in assets and an equal amount of debt. And what's really interesting right now, once they spin it off, Chemours is now its own legal entity under the law. Well, what has Chemours done? They turned around and sued DuPont, saying this was a fraudulent transfer. That case is now pending in Delaware, and it's not a sealed.
Oh, so the executives at Chemours are like, what do we do with this?
Yeah.
And
they're saying what DuPont did was wrong, and it shouldn't be our responsibility to fix their mistake. And so that's playing out in the courts right now.
Interesting. And so, do you have cases, or are these cases waiting for the resolution of the relationship between these two companies?
No, we have cases that are ongoing. We have personal injury cases from the community that was affected directly by DuPont's Teflon manufacturing plant. And then we also have now cases that are being brought on behalf of states, governments and cities that have their own natural resource damages claims, saying this chemical shouldn't be here.
And we're talking about the PF...
the AFFF litigation.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's PFAS generally. There's a lot of different terms that are easy to confuse, but all the same class of chemicals. Same two companies at play, the same two major manufacturers being DuPont and 3M. So they're facing a lot of liability.
And it sounds like we don't know even the half of it in terms of where this chemical is and what other communities are impacted by it.
That's right. I mean, not even half. I mean, we know 3% so far. I mean, that's all the testing that's been done. There are additional government funds being set aside to do testing. The EPA actually encourages, it's called an unregulated contaminant. Still unregulated, despite all we know now, it's still unregulated because the EPA hasn't set a standard. But now many water supplies are starting to look for this chemical, and it's coming out on a weekly basis. California just 2 weeks ago lowered their level that's allowed in their water and found an additional 300 communities that have been infected.
Oh, jeez.
And these are the states that are taking action now. Michigan is a little bit ahead of the curve because they've started doing testing. California as well. But you're going to find it all throughout the country. So far, they've identified about 600 sites, and they're looking for more.
And is this chemical just used exclusively in terms of like fighting fire?
No, it's not. It's in fact, you and I have it in our blood right now through just regular consumer items. Stain-resistant carpets. If you've ever eaten a fast food chain, the hamburger wrappers, the soda cups are lined with these chemicals to help keep water from clinging to them. And so the odd thing, the really scary thing is that you and I, as we sit here having this conversation, we have about 2,000 parts per trillion in our blood. So if our blood was water, it would not be safe for us to drink it. I mean, that's how bad this chemical is. It's in every living organism in our country.
And there's no way to expel it, is there?
No, you have to just wait. The half-life of these chemicals is just 2,000 today.
I'm talking like there's no way of expelling it in a mortal human.
That's what I'm saying. No, you have to just wait it out. So our bodies will get rid of it in about 5 years. Half of it will be out of our body. So 5 years from now, if we're having the same conversation, we'll have 1,000 in us.
But that's presuming I'm not going out eating hamburger or wherever. I mean, is there a website where I can go and see like the different products that have this? Like, I mean, I don't have a stain-resistant carpet.
Right.
And part of it is because I was like, I'm not sure I know how they do that, and I don't know if I want that. Right? Like,
so there are the EPA website for PFAS chemicals, PFAS. They list a lot of the consumer products that historically had it.
PFAS.
Right. So that's the kind of the global family of chemicals. But as of 2016, our country has phased them out from manufacturing processes. But that's very recent. Okay. So you think about the persistence of these chemicals and how we're exposed to them. We're still going to be exposed to them for the foreseeable future. Okay,
so and maybe we'll put a link to that EPA site back in Brooklyn. They'll put that on the it's PFAS. And all right, well, I guess next time I'm here, you'll probably have an update on
absolutely.
the progress of these cases. Wes, thanks so much for your time today. I really
Thank you
appreciate it.
so much for having me. Take care.